There is a sentence that has followed German tank crews for 80 years. One Tiger, the saying goes, was worth 10 Shermans. The problem was that the Americans always brought 11. It sounds like the perfect confession from a beaten army, and it has appeared in books, documentaries, and museum displays for decades. But no historian has ever traced that line to a real panzer commander. It has no verified source. And when researchers went looking for what German tankers actually said about facing 10 Shermans at once, they found something far less flattering to the Tiger and far more revealing about what those crews were truly afraid of. If you had asked a German tank commander in the spring of 1944 what he thought of the American Sherman, he would probably have shrugged. Veterans of the Eastern Front had survived 2 years of fighting the Soviet T-34 across the steppe near Kharkov and Kursk. They had faced massed Soviet armor attacks, hundreds of tanks at a time, and lived to describe it. Compared to that, the American army was an unknown quantity, and German propaganda filled the gap with contempt. Newsreels in Berlin cinemas described the Sherman as a thin-skinned vehicle with a weak gun. Rumors spread through the training grounds in Germany that the American tank caught fire the moment it was hit, and according to later accounts, some German soldiers took to calling it the Tommy Cooker. Whether that nickname was as widespread as post-war books claim is genuinely uncertain. But the attitude behind it was real. On paper, a Panther's long 75mm gun could destroy a Sherman at nearly 2,000 meters, far beyond the range where the Sherman could reliably answer. On paper, the numbers favored Germany. The crews who rolled toward the Normandy coast in June of 1944 believed that paper. The belief did not survive the summer. The Panzer Lehr Division was one of the best equipped armored formations Germany had left, built around instructors from the Panzer training schools. When the Allied invasion fleet appeared off the Normandy beaches, Panzer Lehr was ordered to drive toward the front in daylight. Allied fighter bombers found the columns on the open roads of France, and the division reportedly lost dozens of vehicles before its crews had seen a single enemy tank. The survivors arrived in a landscape that seemed designed to humiliate them. The Normandy bocage was a maze of sunken lanes and hedgerows so dense that a tank commander often could not see 200 meters in any direction. The Panther's long-range gun, the weapon that was supposed to decide every duel before it began, suddenly meant almost nothing. The first engagements followed a pattern that German crews would come to know by heart. A concealed Panther or Panzer IV would catch the lead American tanks at a crossroads near Tilly or on the road to St. Lo, and the opening seconds would belong entirely to the Germans. One Sherman burning, then a second. For a moment the paper math seemed to hold, then the rest of the American column reacted. Shermans peeled off the road into the fields, smoke rounds landed, artillery was called in within minutes. And while the German commander was still tracking targets to his front, more Shermans were working through the hedgerows toward his flanks, where the armor was thin and the crew could not see them coming. The duel he had trained for was becoming an encirclement. The most famous German tank action of the entire campaign shows both halves of this story. On the 13th of June, 1944, the Tiger commander Michael Wittmann ambushed a British armoured column at Villers-Bocage and destroyed a long line of vehicles in a matter of minutes. German propaganda made him the most celebrated tank commander of the war. Less than 2 months later, near the village of Sintho, Wittmann's Tiger pushed across open ground and was caught by multiple Sherman Fireflies firing from concealed positions. His tank was destroyed and the entire crew killed. Exactly whose gun fired the fatal shot is still disputed by historians. What is not disputed is the shape of the ending. Even the legend died the way ordinary crews had been dying all summer. Not in a duel, in a crossfire. But here is the detail that everyone missed at the time. The men inside those German tanks were not simply losing battles. They were living inside a mathematical problem that had already been solved against them. Germany built roughly 1,350 Tiger Is in the entire war. American factories in Detroit and across the United States built close to 50,000 Shermans. And the Tiger was never the ordinary German tank anyway. The vehicle most German crews actually fought in was the Panzer IV, a design from the 1930s, or a turretless assault gun. The nightmare of facing 10 Shermans at once was not an exaggeration. It was often just the ordinary structure of the American army arriving on schedule. A single American tank platoon contained 5 Shermans. 2 platoons moving in mutual support put 10 tanks on the field as a matter of routine, not as a special measure against German heavy armor. The popular claim that American doctrine demanded 5 Shermans to kill 1 Tiger is a post-war myth. No such doctrine existed. The 5-tank platoon was simply how the units were organized. What a German gunner experienced as a deliberate swarm sent to overwhelm him was, on the American side, a Tuesday, and the numbers hid a second, quieter advantage. When a Sherman was knocked out, American recovery crews often dragged it off the battlefield, repaired it in workshops behind the lines, and returned it to service within days. The Americans usually held the ground when the shooting stopped, so they kept their wrecks. The Germans, retreating, kept nothing. A damaged panther left behind a hedgerow was gone forever, no matter how repairable it was. German veterans interviewed after the war kept returning to this same bitter theme. They could win an engagement in the morning and be poorer by nightfall. So what did the crews themselves actually say? This is where the record becomes both careful and surprising. In post-war interrogations and memoirs, German tankers rarely described the Sherman with the contempt the propaganda had taught them. They described a machine that was mechanically reliable in a way their own Panthers, with their fragile final drives, were not. A machine that was fast, that turned its turret quickly, and above all, that never seemed to run out of brothers. Several accounts describe a specific dread reserved for one variant. The British Firefly carried a 17-pounder gun that could kill a Tiger frontally, and it looked almost identical to an ordinary Sherman at combat ranges. According to veteran recollections, experienced German gunners learned to search a column of identical American tanks for the one with the longer barrel and to kill it first. 10 Shermans was a problem. 10 Shermans hiding one Firefly was a lottery. But when interviewers pressed those same veterans on what frightened them most in Normandy, the answer, again and again, was not the Sherman at all. If this kind of deep dive into the real experience of the men inside the machines is what you come here for, subscribe to Untold War Archives. We publish carefully researched World War II documentaries every week. While the Panzer crews were counting enemy tanks through their gun sights, the thing that was actually breaking them was overhead and behind the horizon. German veterans of Normandy described spending more time scanning the sky than the tree line. The Allied fighter bombers, the aircraft German soldiers called Jabos, ruled the daylight. Rocket-firing Typhoons and Thunderbolts circled the battlefield like patient birds, and German tank movement in daylight became something close to suicide. Crews learned to move at night, to sleep under their vehicles, to freeze in place when engines were heard above them. Here is the strange part, and it is one of the most revealing findings of the entire campaign. When British operational research teams examined the destroyed German armor after the battles at Mortain and in the Falaise pocket, they found that only a small fraction of the tanks had actually been destroyed by air attack. Rockets from a moving aircraft almost never hit a tank. What the surveys found instead were German tanks abandoned intact or blown up by their own crews. The aircraft did not need to destroy the tanks. The fear of them destroyed the crew's ability to fight. Men bailed out of running vehicles when the Typhoons dived. Supply columns carrying the fuel and shells the Panzers needed were shredded on the roads. The Jabo killed the tank by starving it and by breaking the nerve of the men inside it. Artillery did the rest. German accounts describe American artillery response times with something close to disbelief. A German tank that fired from a position could expect that position to be smothered in shellfire within minutes. The Sherman in front of a Panther's gun was, in a sense, the least dangerous thing on the battlefield. It was simply the only danger the crew could see. This is also why the great tank duel, the image at the heart of the 11 Shermans legend, mostly never happened. Studies of tank losses on the Western Front suggest that pure tank versus tank combat accounted for only a portion of the destruction on either side. Shermans were killed by concealed anti-tank guns, by mines, and by infantrymen with handheld Panzerfausts in the hedgerows and ruined towns. German tanks were lost to artillery, to mechanical breakdown, to empty fuel tanks, and to their own demolition charges during retreats. The Panther, on paper the finest medium tank of the war, had a final drive so fragile that long road marches destroyed the vehicle as surely as enemy fire. Some historians estimate that a very large share of German panzer losses in the West involved no enemy shot at all. The crews knew this. That knowledge is exactly what the post-war legend was built to soften. By the last winter of the war, the arithmetic had become absurd. German tank crews in the Ardennes offensive of December 1944 were given fuel for only part of the journey and told to capture American fuel dumps along the way. When the dumps were not captured, the tanks simply stopped. King Tigers, the most feared armored vehicles on Earth, were blown up by their own crews on Belgian roadsides, and their men walked home through the snow. Veterans later described the humiliation of it. They had been trained as an elite, told they were the masters of armored war, and they ended it on foot, passing the burned hulls of their own machines. And somewhere in the years after the surrender, the sentence was born. One Tiger was worth 10 Shermans, but they always brought 11. Notice what that sentence does. It lets the defeated crews say they were never outfought, only outnumbered. And it lets the victors tell an underdog story, brave men in inferior tanks beating a superior machine with courage and quantity. Both sides needed the legend, which is probably why nobody ever asked too hard where it came from. The surviving crews, when historians finally did ask, told a less comfortable story. They had not lost a duel. They had lost a war of fuel gauges, spare parts, repair depots, and the sky. Decades later, elderly Panzer veterans were still being interviewed about Normandy, and one theme surfaces again and again in those recorded conversations. When asked what they remembered about the Shermans, they rarely spoke first about armor or guns. They spoke about sound. The sound of engines in the dark, on the far side of the hedgerows, always in numbers, always moving. One old gunner's recollection, summarized in a veteran's account, captured it in a single line. You could knock them out all day, he said, and the next morning the sound was still there. That was what German tank crews really thought about facing 10 Shermans at once. Not that the 10th would kill them, that there would always be a morning, and there would always be more.